Case 1. The Killing of Randy Trimble, 2003. This is not just a story of murder. It's a nightmare straight out of a horror movie. A young woman with a bright future, brutally stabbed 27 times, strangled with Christmas lights, all because the two people closest to her believed killing her would fund their dream film. Betrayal, greed, and unspeakable cruelty collided in one of the most shocking cases in American history. Stay with me, because this isn't just another crime story. This is the most haunting, heartbreaking, and unforgettable case you'll ever hear. A young woman was found dead inside her own home. At first glance, detectives believed the case would be easy to solve. Yet the deeper they dug, the stranger it became. The truth was eventually uncovered, but no one could have foreseen just how disturbing it would be. Randy Trimble was born on December 15, 1974 in Virginia. An only child raised by a single mother, she grew up with a love for the arts, playing the flute, acting in school plays, and performing in the band. After high school, she enrolled at Bloomsburg University in Pennsylvania to study speech therapy, a field that allowed her to combine discipline with her passion for helping children. Her mother worked multiple jobs to keep Randy in school, and Randy repaid that sacrifice with hard work. She excelled academically, eventually earning a scholarship that covered her graduate studies in full. While in college, she met Brian, the man she would later marry. But just before their wedding, Brian was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a devastating illness that would change both of their lives. Many would have walked away. Randy did not. She promised to stand by him no matter what the future held. The couple settled in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, where Randy built a solid career at a local medical center. With her income, she purchased a house, and together they dreamed of starting a family. Randy even took on a second job, determined to build financial security in case Brian's health deteriorated. January 10, 2003 began like any other day. Randy, then 28, worked her hospital shift until 5 p.m., then headed to her second job. By the time she returned home, Brian had already gone out to meet a friend. He came back around 8 p.m. to a house shrouded in darkness. Something felt wrong immediately. Inside, the place was in disarray, items strewn across the floor as though someone had been searching for valuables. Calling out for his wife brought no response. When Brian reached the garage, the horrifying reality came into view. Randy lay on the floor in a pool of blood, a strand of Christmas lights wound tightly around her neck. Paramedics could do nothing but declare her dead. Detectives took over the scene, but clues were scarce. There were no signs of forced entry, no weapon left behind, and nothing obvious pointing to the killer. Forensics dusted for prints and gathered evidence, while Brian reported that cash and jewelry, including Randy's gold diamond ring, had been taken. The autopsy revealed the true horror. Randy had been stabbed 27 times. The killer had attempted strangulation, but failed. There was no evidence of sexual assault. On the surface, it appeared to be a robbery gone wrong, especially with a window left unlocked. But investigators were troubled. The sheer brutality of the attack didn't fit the profile of a simple break-in. From the beginning, they suspected something far more personal, and soon their focus shifted to the person closest to her husband. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. Friends and family admitted to investigators that Randy and Brian's marriage hadn't been perfect. Most of the tension revolved around Brian's illness. Randy, ever practical, was determined to save money and prepare for the worst. while Brian resisted the idea of living in constant anticipation of decline. He wanted to hold on to a sense of normalcy, while she planned for the future. Those differences sparked frequent arguments, enough, in the eyes of detectives, to suggest motive. But the timeline didn't fit. The medical examiner placed Randy's death at approximately 7:30 p.m. At that exact time, Brian was sitting in a cafe an hour away, surrounded by witnesses who remembered seeing him there. Police confirmed the alibi through customers, staff, and travel times. Simply put, there was no way he could have committed the murder. Randy's family also defended him, insisting he could never have harmed her. Detectives quietly agreed. Brian's multiple sclerosis, though still in its early stages, had already begun to limit his physical strength. The brutality of the attack, 27 stab wounds, seemed well beyond his capability. With Brian effectively ruled out, investigators were left with nothing. Forensics had turned up no usable fingerprints, no DNA, no weapon. The trail was cold. Believing the crime was personal, detectives dug into Randy's inner circle. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, no one could name a single enemy. She lived for her family and her work, and nothing suggested a hidden conflict. Weeks passed with no progress, until detectives, frustrated and empty-handed, circled back once again to Brian. Though his alibi remained airtight, his behavior in the aftermath was unsettling. Soon after the murder, he relocated to another town to be closer to his family, stopped showing up to work, and cut all contact with Randy's mother, despite their previously close relationship. Then came the spending. Brian splurged on a new TV, an Xbox, expensive furniture, and countless other luxuries. When questioned, he shrugged it off with a chilling remark. Grieving can get expensive. He explained he was expecting insurance payouts for the stolen jewelry and for Randy's death, and in the meantime was dipping into the savings the couple had built. The spending spree raised eyebrows, but not enough to implicate him. Detectives needed more, so they turned to his workplace for insight. Brian worked in IT at an insurance company, and colleagues confirmed what police already suspected. The marriage had been strained. One woman told investigators that Brian often complained about Randy's strict control over finances, how she scrutinized every expense, leaving him feeling suffocated. She added that just weeks before Randy's death, Brian openly talked about filing for divorce. Then, abruptly, he reversed course. Suddenly, the complaints stopped, and he began telling people everything was fine. Divorce, he insisted, was no longer on the table. Before the interview ended, the co-worker suggested detectives speak with someone Brian had grown especially close to, a man named Blaine. Blaine also worked in the IT department, and he and Brian had bonded over video games and horror films. Blaine had even written a script for a low-budget project inspired by the Blair Witch Project, a dream he and Brian discussed constantly at work. But in the weeks before Randy's murder, something shifted. The chatter about games and movies stopped. Instead, the two kept to themselves, speaking in hushed tones, as though guarding a secret no one else could hear. Detectives began to suspect that Blaine might know more about Randy's death than he was letting on. But instead of hauling him in right away, they decided to take a different approach. If Blaine was involved, Brian was the link and the key to breaking the case wide open. They maintained steady contact with Brian, disguising their persistence as routine follow-ups. By then, he was used to the constant questioning. But this time, detectives asked him to revisit the crime scene and walk them through the night he discovered Randy's body. Brian agreed, yet as he retraced his steps, his story began to unravel. Weeks earlier, he had told police he never touched Randy, that he immediately called 911. Now, standing in the garage, he claimed he had held her hand, even pulled her into his arms. Other details didn't line up either. The inconsistencies may have seemed small, but to seasoned detectives, they were red flags. From that moment on, the strategy shifted. Detectives kept Brian under constant pressure, checking in, tapping his phone, shadowing his every move. They wanted him nervous, always aware that the police were watching. By early May, 5 months after Randy's murder, they were ready to turn the screws tighter. Brought in for another interview, Brian was confronted with everything. The contradictions in his story, his sudden spending spree, the rumors from co-workers, the cracks in his marriage. Then came the line that changed everything. "We know you didn't kill Randy, but we also know you know who did." The room went quiet. After a long pause, Brian asked his mother, who had accompanied him, to step outside. When she was gone, he made his move. He was willing to talk, but only if prosecutors agreed not to pursue the death penalty. Detectives accepted. Brian finally confessed. His marriage, he admitted, had been deteriorating. He resented Randy's strict control over money and the constant feeling that he was being managed rather than loved. Years of frustration had built to a breaking point. Then came Blaine. The two bonded over horror movies, and Blaine shared a script he had written about 5 hikers in the Appalachian Mountains who unleashed the vengeful spirit of a dead man. Brian was enthralled. He wanted to be part of the project and even helped shape the script. The two began planning a low-budget production, but low budget didn't mean free. Blaine estimated they'd need more than $10,000 to get the project off the ground. Blaine couldn't come up with the money. Brian offered to bankroll it himself, dipping into the savings Randy had carefully set aside for his medical future. He believed once the film succeeded, he could replace the funds with interest. Randy, however, flatly refused. To her, it was reckless, a waste of the money she'd sacrificed to save. She also worried about Brian's health. The shoot would mean days trekking through the Appalachian wilderness, something his condition wouldn't allow. In the end, Brian withdrew, leaving Blaine furious but undeterred. Blaine scraped together funding by maxing out credit cards, his own and his wife's. With over $18,000 in debt, he forged ahead, hired actors, and spent a week filming non-stop in the mountains. On the surface, he was elated, but the debt destroyed his personal life. When his wife discovered what he had done, she left him, taking their infant son. Still, Blaine clung to the dream. He believed the movie could save everything, but without money for editing and promotion, the project was dead. That's when Brian returned to the picture. He still wanted in. He still wanted the dream. But there was one insurmountable obstacle: Randy. Together, Brian and Blaine came to a chilling conclusion. If they wanted access to the savings, there was only one way. Randy had to die. In the months that followed, Brian and Blaine began piecing together what they believed would be the perfect crime. Drawing inspiration from the horror films they loved, they devised a plan that was chillingly straightforward. Stage Randy's death to look like a robbery. Not only would it disguise their involvement, it would trigger insurance payouts, one for the stolen jewelry and another $100,000 from Randy's life insurance. To protect Brian from suspicion, the alibi was built into the plan. On the day of the murder, both men left work early and drove to Brian's house. Together, they ransacked the place to make it look like a burglary gone wrong. Then, Brian headed to a nearby town to meet a friend, his cover story, while Blaine stayed behind, waiting. When Randy walked through the door, Blaine struck. He first tried to strangle her with a cord, but Randy fought back fiercely. Overwhelmed, Blaine grabbed a knife and stabbed her again and again, 27 times in total. He then fled the scene, discarding the rubber gloves he had worn to avoid leaving evidence. Roughly an hour later, Brian returned home and dialed 911, feigning shock at the discovery of his wife's body. But behind closed doors, he admitted even he was disturbed by the savagery of the attack. A few days later, Blaine recounted the murder to him in graphic detail, making Brian physically sick. When detectives asked how he could sanction his wife's death, Brian's cold response stunned them. He claimed he only wanted to spare her the pain of divorce. That confession was enough to secure his arrest. But the case was only half solved. Without hard evidence, Blaine remained untouchable, and investigators knew Brian's word alone wouldn't be enough in court. With a warrant in hand, police searched Blaine's car. Inside, they found a receipt that raised immediate suspicion. On the very day of the murder, Blaine had purchased rubber gloves, work gloves, a black hoodie, and black pants. Tracing the same credit card, investigators made a breakthrough. It had also been used to buy a large knife. When detectives obtained an identical model and presented it to the medical examiner, the blade matched Randy's wounds precisely. Still, Blaine appeared to have an alibi. Two friends claimed they had been with him at his apartment around 7:30 p.m., the approximate time of the murder. That timeline, if true, would have cleared him. But when police checked a gas station receipt from the friend's stop after visiting Blaine, the truth came out. The timestamp read 8:30 p.m., not 7:30. That discrepancy gave Blaine more than enough time to kill Randy and return home before anyone saw him. With the evidence finally aligned, detectives arrested Blaine. Up to that point, they'd had almost no direct contact with him. When officers arrived at his door, Blaine collapsed, fainting on the spot. Despite the mounting evidence, Blaine initially clung to his innocence. But when prosecutors announced their intent to seek the death penalty, he folded. In exchange for taking execution off the table, Blaine struck a plea deal. He admitted to killing Randy, saying he had hoped to secure $20,000 from her life insurance to pay off his crushing debts. In the end, both Brian and Blaine received life sentences without the possibility of parole. To this day, they remain behind bars. Randy's death, however, was not in vain. Her mother channeled her grief into action, founding a nonprofit dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence. The organization continues its work today, providing aid and hope to hundreds of people in need. Case 2. The shocking murder of Jessica Kaylor, 2009. She was young, full of dreams, and just hours away from starting another ordinary day. But instead, Jessica Kaylor was stalked from a Walmart parking lot, brutally assaulted, and left to die in one of the strangest and most heartbreaking cases ever recorded. For hours, she was still alive, dazed, disoriented, fighting against a fate no one could save her from. This isn't just another crime story. This is a case so haunting, devastating, and unforgettable that it will leave you shaken long after the video ends. Jessica Kaylor was born on May 8, 1982, in Austin, Texas. She grew up there with her parents and two brothers before the family later settled in the small town of Pflugerville. Jessica's warmth and easygoing nature made her instantly likable, and she had a natural gift for making friends. But beneath her friendly personality was a deep determination. Even in high school, she already knew her path. She wanted to become a teacher. To chase that dream, Jessica enrolled at Texas State University, earning a bachelor's degree in science before pushing forward toward a master's. At the same time, she took a teaching assistant position at an elementary school and picked up shifts at a grocery store to help cover her mounting bills and student loans. Life was hectic, but Jessica never let the pressure dim her optimism. She believed her sacrifices would be worth it, and she was determined to see it through. By September 2009, Jessica was 27 years old, still balancing her studies with 2 jobs. She remained hopeful that soon she would land a permanent teaching position and finally dedicate herself to the career she'd always envisioned. On September 7th, she had the day off. She spent it surrounded by friends and her cousin, Melanie. They lounged at the pool, went out for dinner, and later played pool at a bar. As the night wound down, Jessica, always the responsible one, took on the role of designated driver, making sure everyone got home safely. Melanie was the last drop-off. It was close to 1:30 a.m. when they pulled up. Melanie offered her cousin a place to crash, but Jessica declined. She had an early shift at the grocery store and needed to stop at a 24-hour shop to grab food for her dogs. They said goodnight, and Jessica drove away. By sunrise, something was wrong. Melanie received a call from one of Jessica's co-workers, concerned that Jessica hadn't shown up for her shift. That was completely out of character. Jessica had never skipped work without a reason, and as store manager, she carried even more responsibility. Alarmed, Melanie began calling friends. No one had seen or heard from Jessica. Finally, she reached out to Jessica's brother, John. The two shared an apartment, but he hadn't seen her either. John, a police officer, explained that he'd left for his shift at 5:30 a.m. without checking her room. Still, the news worried him enough to rush home. The moment he walked in, his concern deepened. Jessica's bed hadn't been slept in, and her dogs were restless, acting as if they hadn't been fed. John knew instantly something was very wrong. He contacted his fellow officers, requesting they trace Jessica's cell phone. The signal led them to a restaurant not far from her apartment. Melanie and her boyfriend drove straight there. In the parking lot, they quickly spotted Jessica's car, but what they found inside was horrifying. Jessica was slumped in the driver's seat, motionless. The car was stifling hot, her skin marked with severe sunburns. Melanie's boyfriend immediately called for help. Police and paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was too late. Jessica was already gone. Her body was taken for examination, but one fact was undeniable. The circumstances suggested she hadn't simply died in her sleep. It looked very much like she had been attacked. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. Investigators began by examining Jessica's car, and almost immediately, something stood out. The driver's seat had been pushed unusually far back, suggesting someone other than Jessica had been behind the wheel. Given the injuries already visible on her body, detectives suspected the attack might have taken place right there inside the vehicle. Her keys, wallet, and credit cards were gone. In the back seat sat a bag of dog food, the errand she had planned to run after dropping off her cousin. To police, that was a clear sign she had been there since the night before. From there, detectives moved into the nearby restaurant where the car had been discovered. What they learned inside changed everything. One of the employees told them that when she arrived for her shift early that morning, she had noticed Jessica's car in the lot, and Jessica was still alive. The employee described a disturbing scene. Jessica was sitting naked inside her car, acting strangely, as if she were intoxicated or disoriented. At first, the worker brushed it off, heading inside to start her day. But when she returned outside later, Jessica was sitting on the ground next to the car. She had put her clothes back on, but still seemed unsettled, absent-mindedly running her hands through her hair. A third time, the woman saw her again, back in the driver's seat, talking to herself and making odd hand gestures. It wasn't just one account. Several other witnesses came forward saying they too had seen Jessica alive that morning. Yet despite her bizarre behavior, not a single person thought to intervene or call for help. Detectives turned back to Melanie, asking if Jessica might have been drinking or using drugs that night. But her cousin was adamant. Jessica was completely sober. She had been the designated driver, responsible for getting everyone home safely, and had an early shift the next morning. As for drugs, Melanie said that wasn't even a possibility. Jessica didn't use them. Still, the evidence was mounting that something far more sinister had happened. The medical examiner confirmed what investigators already feared. Jessica had been strangled. The marks on her body showed pressure from both hands and some kind of object, perhaps a rope or belt. Her body was also covered in bruises and scratches, and most devastating of all, she had been sexually assaulted. Experts suggested that the violent trauma may have caused a brain injury, one that left her disoriented and confused. Combined with the extreme heat inside the car, her condition would have worsened rapidly. That could explain why she behaved so strangely, why she never sought help, and why she seemed unaware of the danger she was in. Ultimately, she succumbed to her injuries. Toxicology results later confirmed Melanie's account. There were no drugs or alcohol in Jessica's system, which meant something else became painfully clear. If just one of those witnesses had called for help, Jessica might still be alive. Instead, the chance to save her was lost, and investigators were left with a far heavier task: finding out who had done this to her. Detectives turned their attention to surveillance footage, hoping cameras might reveal what had happened to Jessica. Unfortunately, there were none near the restaurant parking lot where her body was discovered, but there was another angle to pursue. Since Jessica had stopped to buy dog food that night, investigators realized she must have gone to the 24-hour Walmart directly across the street. When police obtained the store's security footage, there she was, Jessica, pulling into the lot and walking inside alone. She looked perfectly fine, calm, composed, no sign of distress. She went straight to the pet aisle, picked up a large bag of dog food, and headed to the register. Nothing seemed unusual until she walked back out. Just seconds later, a man followed her through the same doors. Rewinding the footage, detectives noticed that the man had pulled into the lot just minutes before Jessica. He parked far away, entered the building, but instead of shopping, he went straight into the restroom. Soon after, he re-emerged and walked directly behind Jessica, moving quickly, as if intent on catching up. The cameras then lost sight of him. Jessica's car happened to be parked behind a large tree, blocking the view. Still, the sequence was telling. The man walked toward the area where Jessica's car was parked, vanished from sight, and never reappeared. 2 minutes later, Jessica's car pulled out of the lot. Another camera captured it arriving at the restaurant parking lot, the same place where she would be found dead the next morning. Not long after, someone got out of Jessica's vehicle. The person walked across the lot, back toward Walmart's parking area, and climbed into the same vehicle the suspicious man had arrived in earlier. To detectives, It was now undeniable. This individual was directly tied to Jessica's death. But there was a problem. The footage was grainy. Neither the man's face nor the details of his vehicle could be made out clearly. Investigators pressed on. Jessica's wallet and credit cards had been taken, so they checked her accounts for recent transactions. There, they found a lead. One of her cards had been used at a gas station just 20 minutes after her car was abandoned. When detectives reviewed the gas station's cameras, they spotted a red pickup truck. Inside was the same man from the Walmart footage. Security video from inside the store clinched it. He used Jessica's credit card at the register. Now detectives had proof. This man wasn't just suspicious. He was in possession of Jessica's stolen property. Police released the images to the media, showing both the suspect and his red truck, urging the public to come forward with information. For days, no solid tips came in. Then the break they were waiting for arrived. A woman named Leslie called the police. She said the man in the footage looked exactly like her fiancé's best friend, 29-year-old Crispin Harrell. Leslie explained that Crispin had promised to stop by that evening to pay back money he owed her fiancé, but he never showed. Later, when she saw the news reports about Jessica's murder, she was stunned. The man in the surveillance video was unmistakably him. It was hard for Leslie to accept that someone she knew might be tied to such a horrific crime. But deep down, she knew what she had to do. She called the police and told them everything. As detectives dug into Crispin Harrell's background, a telling detail emerged. Just weeks before Jessica's murder, he had been pulled over by a patrol officer for driving with an expired license. Investigators reviewed the officer's body camera footage, and there was no mistaking it. Crispin looked exactly like their suspect. Even more damning, he was wearing the very same baseball cap seen in the Walmart surveillance video. 5 days after Jessica's death, police showed up at his home. Parked outside was his red pickup truck, identical in model to the one caught on camera. But something was different. The chrome details visible in the surveillance footage had been painted over in black, a hasty attempt to disguise the vehicle. When detectives knocked on his door, Crispin wasted no time with denial. To their surprise, he admitted he had been with Jessica that night. His story, however, raised more questions than it answered. According to him, they had met through an adult website and arranged a casual hookup. He claimed she picked him up in the Walmart parking lot, drove them to a nearby park where they had consensual sex, and then brought him back to Walmart. Before parting ways, he said, they sat in her car talking. He told her he was struggling financially, and Jessica, out of kindness, supposedly handed him her credit card so he could buy gas. Then, he said, they went their separate ways. Crispin explained that when he later saw Jessica's murder on the news, he panicked. Fearing he would be accused, he said he threw away her credit card and quickly repainted parts of his truck. Though delivered with confidence, detectives immediately recognized his version as a fabrication. The Walmart surveillance footage told a very different story. Crispin never approached Jessica until after she had returned to her car. He was clearly seen walking back alone to his own truck. At no point did Jessica's car leave the lot, and no one else was observed near it until the following morning, when her vehicle turned up at the restaurant. To dismantle his claims further, investigators seized his phone, computer, and Jessica's devices. As expected, there was no evidence of any contact between them. No calls, no messages, no online interactions. In fact, forensic analysis confirmed Jessica had never even visited the adult website Crispin claimed they had used to arrange their meeting. But detectives did uncover something incriminating on Crispin's computer. Within hours of police discovering Jessica's body, he had already searched for and read multiple articles about her murder. Jessica's loved ones dismissed his story outright. Friends and family described her as responsible and grounded, certainly not someone who would seek out a late-night hookup with a stranger in a parking lot. She had already told her cousin she planned to go home, feed her dogs, and get some rest before her morning shift. The idea that she would abandon that plan for a reckless encounter didn't fit with who she was. To investigators, it was clear. Crispin wasn't just lying, he was scrambling to deflect blame. But with the evidence stacking higher by the day, there was no way out. His story had collapsed under the weight of the facts. By analyzing the surveillance footage, detectives pieced together what they believed had truly happened that night. Crispin likely spotted Jessica inside Walmart and singled her out as a target. He followed her to her car, forced his way inside, and used threats to silence her. From there, investigators believed he made her drive to a nearby park, where he sexually assaulted her, before returning to the parking lot near Walmart, close to his own truck. Before leaving, he strangled her and stole her wallet and credit cards. When confronted with this version of events, Crispin shut down. He stopped answering questions and demanded a lawyer. On paper, detectives had a strong case, but legally, it was far from airtight. The complication was as unusual as it was troubling. Jessica had survived for hours after the attack. The official cause of death was strangulation, but experts faced a critical problem. Medical science had never documented a case like Jessica's before. Someone strangled, surviving for hours, walking, talking, and then ultimately dying as a direct result. Without precedent, prosecutors feared a jury might struggle to connect the attack with her death beyond reasonable doubt. The evidence strongly pointed to Crispin, but the uncertainty surrounding her survival window threatened to unravel the case in court. The only thing that could have sealed his fate was a confession, but Crispin refused to admit anything. Investigators searched Jessica's car again, desperate for a breakthrough, but came up empty. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing directly tying him to the crime. Prosecutors turned to a fallback option. Since Crispin had already admitted to discarding Jessica's credit card and repainting his truck, they charged him with evidence tampering. At least that way, he could be held accountable for something, while investigators continued building a murder case. In May 2010, Crispin pleaded guilty and received a 10-year prison sentence for tampering with evidence. But for detectives, the fight was far from over. They were determined to deliver full justice for Jessica, and that meant proving scientifically that Crispin's attack caused her death. For years, progress stalled. Then, in 2013, a breakthrough surfaced. Investigators discovered a medical journal article describing rare cases where strangulation did not immediately kill the victim. Instead, it triggered what experts called delayed death syndrome, a condition where brain damage left victims disoriented, confused, and unable to seek help until their bodies finally gave out. The description matched Jessica's final hours almost exactly. Witnesses had seen her behaving strangely, muttering, running her hands through her hair. Classic signs of the disorientation caused by such trauma. The article also echoed the original medical examiner's suspicion that Jessica had suffered a brain injury from the strangulation, one that impaired her awareness until it was too late. With this new science in hand, detectives contacted the author of the study. For the first time, they had the expert testimony needed to explain Jessica's survival period and prove that her death was still the direct result of Crispin's attack. Armed with cutting-edge medical evidence, they were finally ready to bring a full murder case against him. In May 2014, After years of painstaking work, Crispin Harl was finally arrested and charged with murder. Yet even as the evidence mounted, he clung to his claim of innocence. At trial, his defense attorney zeroed in on one glaring issue. There was no DNA evidence tying Crispin directly to the crime. Prosecutors argued that Jessica had fought fiercely for her life, likely scratching her attacker and leaving behind genetic material under her fingernails. But forensic experts for the state explained why no such evidence could be recovered. Jessica's body had remained in her car for hours under punishing heat. At those temperatures, DNA rapidly degrades. By the time investigators examined her, any trace under her nails would have been destroyed. The state's case leaned heavily on the mountain of surveillance footage. Every frame pointed toward Crispin's guilt. But just as prosecutors seemed to be gaining ground, the defense found its opening. Crispin's attorney challenged the timestamps on the footage. When investigators first obtained the security video, it had no timestamps. To establish a timeline, prosecutors later added them using specialized software. The defense argued this was a serious breach, claiming the altered footage had never been provided for review. The judge agreed. On that technicality, the trial collapsed. A mistrial was declared, and once again, Crispin slipped through the system's grasp. Still, he remained behind bars, serving out his 10-year sentence for evidence tampering. Meanwhile, prosecutors regrouped, determined not to let him walk free forever. Over the next several years, Crispin's legal team fought aggressively to block a retrial, arguing that another prosecution would violate his rights. But higher courts sided with the state, paving the way for a second trial. In 2018, the case returned to court. This time, prosecutors left nothing to chance. Every piece of evidence, every timeline, every expert testimony was meticulously prepared. The jury heard about Crispin's suspicious behavior, the surveillance trail, and the scientific explanation of delayed death syndrome that accounted for Jessica's final hours. Step by step, the prosecution dismantled his defense. This time, it worked. The jury found Crispin guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors had deliberately chosen not to pursue the death penalty, fearing the medical complexities of the case might give even one juror reason to hesitate. In a capital case, they couldn't afford that risk. Crispin appealed in the years that followed, but his request was denied. Today, he remains in prison, with virtually no chance of release. For Jessica's family, the verdict was bittersweet. They expressed gratitude to investigators and prosecutors who never gave up, even as the case dragged on for nearly a decade. Yet they admitted that no conviction, no sentence, could truly heal their grief. Justice had been served, but closure would never come. Case 3. Ashley Meade's body, dismembered across states. 2017. This is one of the darkest, most heartbreaking stories you will ever hear. Ashley Meade, a young mother full of life and love for her little girl, thought she was safe in the hands of the father of her child. But jealousy and obsession turned her home into a nightmare. What followed was a crime so disturbing, so grotesque, that even seasoned investigators were left shaken. Her body dismembered, stuffed into a suitcase, and discarded along highways across America. This isn't just another crime story. This is the most horrifying, shocking, and unforgettable case you'll ever see. And once you hear it, you will never forget it. Ashley Meade was born on November 14, 1991, in the small town of Warren, Pennsylvania. She grew up in a large family surrounded by siblings, and from an early age she had a creative spirit. Ashley loved to sing, write poetry, and experiment with fashion. She was also deeply connected to nature and dreamed of seeing the world. By her mid-20s, she had already traveled through nearly every U.S. state, with trips to Canada and Mexico as well. After graduating high school, Ashley pursued liberal arts in New York before transferring to Louisiana State University in Shreveport. There, she met Adam, a young man who would later play a central role in her life. For a few years, Ashley remained focused on her studies until tragedy struck. A devastating car accident left her facing a long, painful recovery. Though she fought her way back to health, the accident buried her under medical debt. The bills forced her to drop out of college and take on full-time work. Around the same time, her relationship with Adam began to fall apart. Eventually, they separated, but then Ashley discovered she was pregnant. Despite the setbacks she'd faced, she was overjoyed. She wanted her child to grow up in a two-parent home, and while she and Adam no longer wanted to be together, they agreed to co-parent their daughter. Adam had since moved to Boulder, Colorado to study culinary arts, and Ashley chose to follow him there. The two rented an apartment together, and soon after, Ashley gave birth to a baby girl, Winter Daisy. While they weren't a couple anymore, Ashley and Adam devoted themselves to raising their daughter, sharing responsibilities, and giving her as much love as possible. Ashley worked as a teaching assistant at a preschool, later joining a program dedicated to helping children from low-income families prepare for school. The work was demanding, but she had a natural gift with children. They adored her from the very beginning. By February 2017, Ashley was 25 years old, raising her one-year-old daughter and working with kids every day. But on February 13th, everything changed. She failed to show up for work. At first, her co-workers assumed something minor had come up, but when she didn't respond to calls or texts, concern grew. The next day, after she missed another shift, one colleague contacted police and asked for a welfare check. Officers arrived at Ashley's apartment complex and immediately sensed something was wrong. The outdoor lights by the entrance were switched on in the middle of the day. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the apartment appeared lived in, but Ashley, Adam, and Winter were gone. Her belongings, purse, phone, driver's license were still inside, yet her car was missing from the lot. In the kitchen, officers found something especially chilling, a half-cooked meal still sitting in the oven, as if dinner had been interrupted suddenly and never resumed. The more they looked, the stranger it became. When police contacted Ashley's mother, she said she hadn't heard from her daughter in days. More importantly, Ashley's beloved cat was still at the apartment, something her mother found deeply troubling. Ashley never left the cat behind, no matter where she went. Her mother began reaching out to friends and relatives, but no one had spoken to Ashley recently. Meanwhile, police tried to contact Adam, but his phone was off and he wasn't answering. Investigators grew more alarmed when they realized his phone had been deliberately powered down. Ashley's phone was handed over to forensics, and the data revealed crucial clues. Her last recorded activity was on February 12th, 2 days before she was reported missing. It had been her day off. She spent it with Winter, shopping, running errands, buying a new dress, and snapping a few photos before returning home. Neighbors helped detectives piece together her final hours. Around 6 p.m., one saw her taking out the trash. Then, just before 9 p.m., another neighbor heard a loud, heavy thud from Ashley's apartment, something that sounded like a body falling down the stairs. Moments later, silence. This detail alarmed investigators, especially since Ashley's phone activity stopped around that same time. The timeline suggested something violent may have happened inside her apartment that very night. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. Detectives soon uncovered a new lead. Data pulled from Ashley's phone revealed that, shortly before she vanished, she had been dating a man named Harvey. Going through their messages, investigators noticed something unsettling in his tone, enough to make them want to question him face to face. When police arrived at Harvey's home, he fully cooperated. Without hesitation, he allowed them to search the house, even without a warrant. He insisted he had no idea where Ashley was, and claimed he hadn't spoken to her in days. On the night she disappeared, Harvey said he had been with friends. Detectives checked his alibi, and it held up. His friends backed his story, and the data from his phone confirmed it. For now, Harvey was ruled out. With that avenue closed, investigators shifted focus. Ashley was still missing, and they needed to find Adam. They began reaching out to his relatives, hoping he had contacted someone. That's when they finally caught a break. Adam's parents in Louisiana told detectives that he had shown up at their house on February 13th, just one day after Ashley disappeared. To their surprise, he wasn't alone. He had brought Winter with him, but Ashley was nowhere to be seen. The visit seemed odd. Adam hadn't mentioned he was coming, and the drive from Colorado to Louisiana was nearly 1,000 miles. When questioned, Adam explained the trip had been planned, so Winter could spend time with her family. Despite the unexpected arrival, his parents were glad to see them. Adam stayed the night and left the following day, heading to Arkansas to visit his grandmother. Detectives asked his relatives to tell Adam to contact them immediately. At first, he ignored their calls, but eventually he switched on his phone and reached out. Over the phone, Adam claimed he had no idea where Ashley was. He said he had been trying to contact her, but she never answered. Then, he gave investigators his version of what happened on the night of February 12th. According to Adam, the two had gotten into a heated argument that turned physical. He admitted he hit Ashley. Afterward, he said, he left the apartment with Winter to keep things from escalating further. Because he didn't own a car, he also took Ashley's vehicle. At that moment, Adam told detectives he was already on the road, driving through Oklahoma. The more police considered his story, the more suspicious it sounded. Something didn't add up. But since Adam was out of state, they couldn't simply pull him in for questioning. Then investigators noticed a crucial legal detail. Adam's name wasn't on Winter's birth certificate. That meant he had no legal right to take her across state lines without Ashley's consent. Detectives seized the opportunity. They contacted Oklahoma authorities and asked them to detain him. It didn't take long. Patrol officers soon spotted Ashley's car and pulled it over. Adam was taken into custody, and thankfully, Winter was safe. But what investigators found inside the vehicle deepened their fears. Forensic teams searched the car and discovered blood beneath one of the back seats. Testing confirmed what they dreaded. It belonged to Ashley. For the first time, detectives had physical evidence suggesting Ashley might no longer be alive. But the question remained: what exactly had happened to her? That was about to change. Just as investigators were closing in on Adam, another clue surfaced. Soon after detectives spoke with his parents, they received an unexpected call from his younger sister. She explained that she hadn't seen Adam and Winter on the day they first arrived in Louisiana. Instead, she stopped by her parents' house the following morning. By then, her parents had already left for work, and Adam was supposed to be preparing for his trip out of state. The moment she walked in, his reaction unsettled her. Adam looked startled, genuinely shocked to see her. He seemed nervous, agitated, and his behavior immediately raised red flags. Then she noticed something even more disturbing. Cleaning supplies were scattered across the guest bedroom, and it was clear Adam had been scrubbing the floor. When she asked what was going on, Adam gave her a bizarre excuse. He said he had suddenly gotten sick, vomited on the carpet, and was just trying to clean it before leaving. When she offered to help, Adam refused sharply. Instead, he ushered her out of the house in a rush. Detectives didn't waste time. They headed straight to Louisiana and searched the home with a forensic team. What they found was chilling. In the guest bedroom Adam had been scrubbing, investigators uncovered multiple traces of blood. In the backyard shed, they discovered an electric saw and a barbecue lid, both smeared with blood. Testing confirmed what they already feared. The blood belonged to Ashley. At that point, there was no doubt. She hadn't simply vanished. Something horrific had happened to her, but questions remained. If Adam had killed Ashley in Colorado, why would he transport her body more than 1,000 miles away? And what had he done with it after leaving his parents' house? Detectives were preparing to confront him when the case suddenly took another grisly turn. That same day, February 15th, police in a small Oklahoma town made a disturbing discovery. A gas station employee stepped outside to take out the trash and noticed a brand new suitcase sitting near the dumpster. Curious why someone would throw away something like that, she unzipped it. What she saw made her recoil in horror. Inside was a human torso. Police arrived quickly and sent the remains for DNA testing. At first, they had no way of identifying the victim. But when word spread about Ashley Meade's disappearance, Oklahoma detectives reached out to their counterparts in Colorado. Samples were compared, and the results confirmed the worst. The torso belonged to Ashley. Investigators immediately pulled surveillance footage from the gas station. The cameras covering the dumpster told the story. The footage showed Ashley's car pulling into the lot. Adam stepped out, carrying the suitcase, and casually left it by the dumpsters before driving away. With that, detectives could finally piece together a timeline, a horrifying sequence that revealed what had likely happened to Ashley Meade. The evidence painted a chilling picture. Detectives believed Adam had killed Ashley on the night of February 12th, inside their apartment. What followed was not an impulsive act, but a calculated plan. By traveling to visit his relatives, Adam could create the illusion of a normal family trip, while secretly disposing of Ashley's remains across multiple states, making it far more difficult for police to trace. The blood found inside his parents' house in Louisiana confirmed their theory. Adam had brought Ashley's body with him. The next morning, after his parents left for work, he used their electric saw to dismember her remains. Then he loaded his daughter into the car and set out on the road, scattering evidence along his route. This realization left detectives facing a daunting truth. Adam had traveled hundreds of miles before being arrested. He could have dumped parts of Ashley's body anywhere along the way. Finding the rest of her remains would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. Still, investigators refused to give up. They carefully retraced his steps, gathering surveillance footage from every possible stop. Their persistence paid off. At a gas station in Myrtlon, Arkansas, cameras captured Adam tossing something into a dumpster. But by the time the footage was reviewed, the trash had already been hauled to a landfill. Determined, authorities launched a massive recovery effort. More than 40 searchers combed through the landfill for days. Yet despite the scale of the operation, nothing was ever found. The absence of Ashley's full body posed a serious challenge. Without it, medical examiners couldn't determine an exact cause of death. The torso that was recovered bore cuts and abrasions, some of which were inflicted while she was still alive. Likely defensive wounds as she fought for her life. But that was all they had. Meanwhile, Adam continued to deny everything. Even when confronted with the damning evidence, he refused to confess. He insisted he had left after an argument, taking Winter with him, and claimed Ashley was alive when he walked out. But detectives didn't need his admission. The trail of blood, the remains, the surveillance footage, all of it told the story. Adam was arrested and charged with murder. As prosecutors built their case, they uncovered one final damning piece of evidence: Adam's journal. Its pages revealed his dark thoughts long before Ashley's death. He wrote about wanting to kill her, filled with resentment over their arrangement. Adam believed Ashley was only living with him for the sake of their daughter. In a sense, he wasn't wrong. Ashley had made it clear their relationship was over, and she was staying for Winter's sake. But Adam wanted more. He longed for a romantic reconciliation, something Ashley never intended. At the same time, his journal showed the depth of his love for his daughter and his fear of losing her. The prosecution argued that jealousy and control were at the heart of his motive. Ashley had started seeing someone new, and Adam couldn't stand it. More than anything, he was terrified she would leave him for good and take Winter with her. That, prosecutors said, was the breaking point. In the aftermath, Adam tried to disguise his crime as a disappearance. He even called and texted Ashley's phone after killing her, pretending to be concerned, as if he had no idea where she'd gone. But by then, the truth was already unraveling, and his lies could no longer hide it. Before the trial began, Adam's defense revealed that he had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD stemming from his military service. But in the eyes of the court, those details did not absolve him of responsibility. His actions were deliberate, calculated, and devastating. In April 2018, a jury unanimously found Adam guilty of murder. The judge handed down a sentence of life in prison, plus an additional 12 years. Adam later tried to overturn the verdict through appeal, but his request was denied. He remains behind bars to this day and continues to withhold one crucial truth: the location of the rest of Ashley's remains. There is one final heartbreaking detail. After Adam's arrest, custody of Winter was placed in the hands of Child Protective Services. Both sides of the family fought to take her in, but authorities kept the matter sealed, citing her age. What became of her afterward has never been made public. All anyone can do now is hope that Winter was eventually placed with relatives who could give her the stability and love her mother would have wanted for her, and not left to grow up lost in the foster care system. Case 4. The Murders of Channing Christian and Chris Nuome. 2007. What began as a simple night out for a young couple turned into one of the most brutal crimes in modern American history. Channing Christian and Chris Nuome were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered in ways so cruel that even hardened detectives were left speechless. For days, their families searched in desperation, only to discover a nightmare that shook the entire nation. This isn't just another crime story. This is the most horrifying, heartbreaking, and unforgettable case you will ever watch. A story of pure evil that America still struggles to comprehend. Channing Christian was born on April 29, 1985 in Texas. At age 12, her family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where she quickly settled in with her parents and older brother. Channing's personality made it easy. She was outgoing, approachable, and always ready to lend a hand. Friends said she had a way of connecting with people instantly, no matter who they were. That kindness shaped her future. Channing wanted a career where she could help others, so she enrolled at the University of Tennessee to study sociology. Staying close to home mattered to her. She was deeply connected to her family, but she also wanted independence, working 2 part-time jobs to support herself while pursuing her degree. During her time at school, she met Chris Nuome, a 23-year-old carpenter. Chris had already built a strong reputation in his community for his skill and work ethic. He and Channing clicked immediately and soon began dating. By early 2007, they had been together long enough that friends and family saw them as inseparable. On January 6, 2007, the couple planned to attend a friend's birthday party. That afternoon, Shannon went to another friend's apartment, where Chris was supposed to pick her up later. Running a bit late, he dropped off a different friend at the party first before heading to meet her. But as the evening went on, concern grew. The party was just a 10-minute drive away, yet neither Shannon nor Chris ever showed. At first, friends assumed their plans had changed, but it was unusual. This wasn't like them. When repeated calls went unanswered, unease set in. By midnight, worry turned into action. Friends drove to the apartment complex where Shannon had been waiting. In the parking lot, they spotted Chris's truck, but Shannon's car was gone. They assumed the couple had simply skipped the party and went back. Around that time, Shannon called her mother to say she'd be home later than expected. She and Chris had decided to spend the night together, maybe grab a bite to eat and watch a movie. She promised to be back by 3:30 a.m., but 3:30 came and went. Shannon never arrived. Her mother initially thought she might have stayed over at Chris's place or with friends, but the next morning, reality hit. Shannon's boss called. She hadn't shown up for work. Almost simultaneously, Chris's parents reported that he hadn't come home either. Now both families were alarmed. Their children were adults, yes, but neither had a history of disappearing without contact. Shannon, especially, was reliable. She wouldn't miss work without a reason. Calls to local hospitals turned up nothing. When they went to police, they were told to wait 24 hours before filing a missing persons report. But Shannon's parents weren't about to sit still. They contacted her phone company, desperate for a lead. To their surprise, the company agreed to trace her phone. Records showed Shannon had checked her voicemail 3 times during the night. Then the phone went dark. The last signal came from a tower near North Cherry Street, a neighborhood notorious for crime. That discovery only deepened the fear. Why would Shannon ever be in that area? It made no sense. Her family took matters into their own hands, scouring the streets themselves. Hours later, they spotted her car parked just blocks from where her phone last pinged. The moment they approached, they knew something was wrong. Her belongings were gone. Her photos, charger, everything she normally carried. The car's interior was dirty, completely out of character for Shannon, who always kept it spotless. And one detail chilled them. The driver's seat had been pushed all the way back, far beyond her reach. Someone much taller had been behind the wheel. It was clear. Shannon hadn't been the one driving her own car. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. After the unsettling discovery of Shannon's abandoned car, her parents once again called police. And this time, officers finally responded with urgency. When they examined the vehicle, what they saw was deeply disturbing. The door handles and interior surfaces had been wiped clean, as if someone had deliberately erased fingerprints. Then there was something even more suspicious. An empty, crumpled cigarette pack tossed inside. Neither Shannon nor Chris smoked. The detail stood out immediately. It suggested someone else had been in that car, someone trying to cover their tracks. Investigators considered the possibility that the vehicle had been stolen, but they still had no idea where Shannon or Chris were. Then, while searching more carefully, they found the first real lead. Wedged between the seats was an envelope with a handwritten address. Forensics examined it and quickly found a fingerprint. When the results came back, the match was clear. LaMarcus Davidson, a convicted felon with an extensive record. And the address written on the envelope, it was his residence, just blocks away. Detectives wasted no time. They went straight to Davidson's house. No one was home, but given the circumstances, officers had reason to believe Shannon and Chris might be in immediate danger. That gave them legal grounds to enter without a warrant. The interior was in disarray, but certain details stopped them cold. On the floor were Shannon's purse, her shoes, and other personal belongings. Chris's baseball cap and driver's license were also there. But the most horrifying discovery was still to come. In the kitchen, an officer lifted the lid of a trash can. Inside, wrapped in cloth and trash bags, was a human body. It was Channon. The case instantly shifted from a missing persons search to a homicide investigation. Her body was sent to the medical examiner. Now detectives had two urgent questions. Where was Chris? And where was LaMarcus Davidson? The answer to one of those questions came almost immediately. Another police department contacted investigators with a report. Nearly 2 days earlier, a railroad worker had discovered the body of an unidentified man near the tracks. At the time, no one knew who he was. But now, detectives suspected the victim might be Chris Nuome. A DNA test confirmed their worst fears. The autopsies revealed the full extent of the horror. Both Channon and Chris bore numerous injuries, cuts, and bruises. Both had been sexually assaulted. Chris had died from multiple gunshot wounds. Channon's cause of death was suffocation. Forensic evidence linked Davidson directly to the crime. Biological material recovered from Channon's body matched his DNA. His fingerprints were found on the trash bags used to wrap her remains. Inside his house, investigators also recovered spent shell casings. Ballistic testing confirmed they matched the bullets that killed Chris. With mounting evidence, detectives had no doubt. LaMarcus Davidson was directly involved in the murders. Now the investigation shifted into high gear with one mission: track him down before he could vanish. Investigators pulled LaMarcus Davidson's cell phone records and quickly discovered he had been in frequent contact with a man named Eric in the days following Channon and Chris's disappearance. It didn't take long to track Eric down. At first, he denied knowing where LaMarcus was. But when detectives laid out the gravity of the crimes and warned that he could face charges as an accomplice, Eric cracked. He admitted that LaMarcus had been hiding in a vacant house listed for sale. He also confessed that on the very night Channon and Chris vanished, the two of them had robbed that same property. Police rushed to the location. Inside, they found LaMarcus surrounded by trash and empty food containers, clutching a gun. One detail chilled them even more. He was wearing Chris's sneakers. Taken into custody, LaMarcus began spinning stories. He flatly denied involvement, then shifted his narrative again and again, 5 different versions in total. First, he claimed ignorance. Then, that someone else had kidnapped the couple. Later, he insisted he had only borrowed their car to sell drugs. Each statement contradicted the last. He never confessed, but his shifting accounts offered detectives something valuable: confirmation that others were likely involved. LaMarcus pointed to his half-brother, Latalvis, and their friend George as the real killers. Detectives quickly tracked both men down and brought them in, along with Eric, who was now firmly on their radar as an accomplice. The circle widened again. Investigators uncovered a 5th suspect, 18-year-old Vanessa. She too was taken into custody. One by one, the suspects began to turn on each other. None wanted to shoulder the blame, but together their stories and the growing mountain of forensic evidence allowed detectives to piece together what happened that night. LaMarcus emerged as the ringleader. He was a drug dealer, and that night his goal was simple: steal a car for deliveries. He gathered 3 accomplices and Vanessa, and they set out to find a target. Their opportunity came at the same apartment complex where Channon had been waiting for Chris. They spotted her SUV, with Channon inside and Chris standing nearby. What began as a plan to steal a vehicle escalated into something far darker. At gunpoint, they forced the couple into the car and drove them to LaMarcus's house. There, the nightmare unfolded. DNA evidence later confirmed that both LaMarcus and Latalvis sexually assaulted the victims. For hours, Shannon and Chris were subjected to brutal abuse, humiliation, and torture. By early morning, the attackers dragged Chris to the nearby railroad tracks. He was shot multiple times and left to die. The group then returned to the house, where Shannon's torment continued. She remained alive for nearly 2 full days while her family and friends were already searching desperately for her. In the end, they suffocated her. Her body was stuffed into a trash can in Davidson's kitchen, hidden in plain sight, until police uncovered the truth. Investigators soon uncovered even more damning details. LaMarcus hadn't just stolen Chris's sneakers. He also took Chris's phone and several of Shannon's personal belongings, items he later gifted to his girlfriend as if they were trophies. Vanessa, meanwhile, tried to portray herself as an unwilling participant. She told police she had been forced to stay at the house against her will. But when investigators searched her home, they found a diary that told a very different story. In it, Vanessa described the night as a wild adventure and admitted she had enjoyed the experience. In the end, all 5 suspects were hit with lengthy lists of charges. Prosecutors began preparing for trial, but the process was long and complicated. More than 2 years passed before the first case reached the courtroom. During that time, defense attorneys successfully argued that the trial should be moved out of Knoxville. The city had been gripped by outrage since the murders, and the defense insisted their clients could never receive a fair trial there. Ultimately, the court agreed, and the venue was changed. The first defendant to face a jury was Eric. While investigators never found direct evidence that he participated in the murders, they did uncover proof that he knew exactly what was happening. That was enough to secure a conviction. He received the maximum penalty available for his charges, 18 years in prison. Then came the trials of LaMarcus, LaTalvis, and George. Their attorneys attempted a desperate strategy, claiming that Shannon and Chris had somehow willingly taken part in the abuse. The jury dismissed the argument outright. All 3 men were convicted. LaMarcus received a death sentence, while LaTalvis and George were sentenced to life in prison. Vanessa's case was more complicated. Initially, she had been granted immunity in exchange for testifying against the others. But the court later ruled that her deal only covered the carjacking charges, not the murder and sexual assault. As a result, she was prosecuted as well. Ultimately, Vanessa was convicted and sentenced to 53 years behind bars. By the time the verdicts were handed down, it seemed that justice had finally been served. But in 2011, the case took a shocking turn. The judge who had presided over all 5 trials resigned in disgrace after revelations surfaced that he had been having an affair with a court employee and purchasing illegal drugs from criminals. Because of the scandal, a higher court decided to review many of his cases, including those of LaMarcus, LaTalvis, George, and Vanessa. The news ignited outrage in Knoxville. Families of the victims feared the killers might escape their original sentences. In the end, prosecutors successfully upheld the convictions and sentences of LaMarcus and LaTalvis. But George and Vanessa were granted new trials, another painful chapter in a case that had already horrified the community. At her retrial, Vanessa was once again convicted on the same charges. But this time, her sentence was reduced, from 53 years down to 35. George also received a lighter outcome, his new sentence making him eligible for parole after serving 51 years. Yet while their punishments were lessened, the retrials had unexpected consequences that swung the other way. During the new proceedings, prosecutors uncovered powerful evidence implicating Eric more deeply than before. It became clear he had played an active role in the torture and murders. In 2019, Eric was indicted again, this time facing charges far more severe than his original case. He was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 90 years. From an 18-year term to what is effectively a permanent sentence, Eric's fate was sealed. Vanessa, however, became eligible for parole after serving just 7 years. So far, every one of her requests has been denied. She remains in prison. Despite delays, retrials, and legal twists, all of those responsible for the murders of Channon Christian and Chris Nuome were ultimately held accountable. Still, many observers, and many in Knoxville, believed that every one of them should have faced the death penalty. The crime did more than devastate 2 families. It shocked Knoxville, and it horrified the entire country. The brutality was almost beyond comprehension. In the years that followed, the house where the nightmare unfolded was torn down. In its place, a memorial was built in honor of Channon and Chris. The University of Tennessee also created scholarships in their memory, ensuring their names would live on through the opportunities given to future students. And as for LaMarcus Davidson, the ringleader, his death sentence has yet to be carried out. Nearly 20 years later, he remains on death row, a grim reminder of a crime that still casts a shadow. Case 5. How Undercover Cops Exposed Alan's Deadly Secret. 2012. Lisa Mitchell vanished without a trace, leaving behind her children, her family, and a trail of chilling emails and voicemails that only deepened the mystery. For 2 years, no one knew what happened, but the truth was far darker than anyone imagined. Hidden beneath her own home, buried in cement, was a secret her partner thought he could keep forever. What followed was one of the most daring undercover operations in Canadian history, Operation Aurora, a year-long deception that finally forced a killer to confess. This isn't just another crime story. This is the most haunting, shocking, and unforgettable case you will ever see. Lisa Mitchell was born on August 5, 1983 in Calgary, Canada. From the time she was a child, she had a creative spark. At just 4 years old, she discovered a love for drawing, and as she grew older, that passion only deepened. In high school, her artistic side expanded into music. She started a small band with friends, blending her love of art and sound into something that made her stand out. After graduation, Lisa put college on hold. She needed to support herself financially, so she worked a string of part-time jobs. While waitressing at a restaurant, she met a man named Alan. The two began dating, and over time, they built a life together. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and eventually moved into their own home in a quiet neighborhood, committed to raising their family. Life moved steadily until late October 2012. On the 27th, Lisa, then 29, headed to her evening shift at a hotel where she worked alongside her mother. That night, the hotel hosted a Halloween-themed party. Lisa and her mom enjoyed the shift, chatting and laughing while they worked. When the event wrapped up, Lisa decided to spend the night at her mother's house rather than make the long drive home. The next morning, the two sat together, reminiscing about the party and discussing their upcoming week. Then Lisa's phone rang. After the call, she abruptly told her mother she needed to head home right away. She said goodbye, climbed into her car, and left. Her mother thought it was unusual but didn't press the issue. As the days passed, however, that uneasy feeling grew. Lisa usually checked in with her mom several times a week, no matter how busy life got. This time, there was nothing. Calls went unanswered. At first, her mother told herself Lisa must have been busy with work and the kids. But when several days passed without a single word, worry turned to alarm. Finally, she drove to Lisa's house, but Lisa wasn't there. Instead, she was greeted by Alan, who claimed he didn't know where Lisa had gone either. According to him, the day after she left her mother's, October 28th, they'd had an argument. He said he went out to buy cigarettes, and when he came home, Lisa was gone. The story didn't sit right. Her mother couldn't imagine Lisa leaving without saying a word, especially abandoning her children. Then, she noticed something strange. Hanging in the closet were Lisa's winter coat and boots. It was late October in Calgary, too cold to go anywhere without them. Inside the house, she spotted more troubling details. Lisa's favorite bracelet and necklace, the ones she never left home without, were still there. Yet her purse was missing. Before she left, Alan mentioned something else. Lisa had sent him an email, and he suggested her mother check her own inbox too. Back home, she turned on the computer. There it was, an email from Lisa. In it, she said she was tired and needed to get away for a while. More messages followed in the coming weeks, each one insisting she was fine. But no matter how many times her mother asked, Lisa never explained why she had suddenly left or where she had gone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. On November 16th, Lisa's mother awoke to find a missed call from her daughter. The call had come through at 2:45 a.m. and gone to voicemail. For a brief moment, she felt relief. Finally, some sign of life. But as she listened to the message, that relief quickly unraveled. Lisa's voice was there, but something about it didn't sound right. The message was rambling and fragmented. "Hey, I'm okay. Sometimes my weeks get crazy, you know." And it was quiet for a while, and then all of a sudden this happened, and within half a day I should. But he's back now, and I got to go. Love you. None of it made sense. Who was she talking about? What had happened? The more her mother replayed it, the more unsettling it became. That was the breaking point. She could no longer wait and hope for answers. She went to the police. Investigators quickly learned that Lisa and Alan's relationship had been turbulent for years. Even before their children were born, the two had broken up and reconciled more times than anyone could count. Things stabilized briefly after the kids arrived, but old problems resurfaced. Lisa was increasingly frustrated that Alan could never hold a steady job. He bounced from one position to another, sometimes not working at all. That left Lisa to carry the weight of the household, working 2 full-time jobs while also raising the children. It wore her down, and friends said she had begun thinking seriously about leaving. In the end, she stayed, convinced it was better for the children to have both parents under one roof. When detectives questioned Alan, he admitted the relationship had been rocky. He said that in recent years, he and Lisa had agreed to stay together solely for the children's sake. He even claimed Lisa occasionally saw other men, and that he was fully aware. As for her disappearance, Alan insisted he had no idea where she'd gone. He said he wasn't surprised she decided to leave, though he couldn't understand how she could abandon him to care for 2 kids on his own. Police searched the couple's home, but found nothing conclusive. When they examined Lisa's computer, however, they discovered conversations with several men living in other cities. That raised the possibility she might have left to stay with one of them. But when investigators contacted those men, they all gave the same answer. They hadn't seen Lisa. Detectives also tried to trace the email address that had sent messages to Lisa's mother, as well as the phone number behind the mysterious voicemail. Both led to dead ends. Months passed, and still no trace of Lisa. Investigators pushed her case to the media, hoping for leads, but nothing surfaced. Eventually, the emails stopped coming altogether. With each passing week, her mother's hope dimmed. In her heart, she couldn't shake the suspicion that Alan had been involved. But every time she raised it, police told her the same thing. There was no evidence tying him to Lisa's disappearance. After Lisa vanished, Alan carried on raising their children alone. Over time, his life appeared to stabilize. He secured a steady job after meeting a man who was opening a car dealership, and the man's girlfriend occasionally babysat the kids, easing some of his burden. Not long after, Alan began thinking about dating again. One day, while leaving work, a woman accidentally rear-ended his car during bad weather. She assured him her company would cover the damages, then offered him hockey tickets as a gesture of goodwill. They stayed in touch, and soon Alan began entertaining the idea of starting something more with her. 2 years passed. Alan seemed to be moving on. There were no new messages, no updates, and no sign of Lisa. But in early December 2014, everything changed. While on a work trip with 2 co-workers, Alan received a call that froze him in his tracks. On the other end was a detective newly assigned to Lisa's case. He told Alan he believed Lisa was no longer alive, and that police had a warrant to search his house again. In fact, they were already on their way. According to his colleagues, Alan's face went pale. He hung up, lit a cigarette, and said he needed to tell them something. He began recounting a story he claimed had weighed on him for years. 2 years earlier, Alan said, he and Lisa had gotten into yet another heated argument. He couldn't recall what sparked it, only that it escalated quickly. At one point, he alleged, Lisa grabbed a kitchen knife and threatened him, saying she could send him to the hospital, call the police, and claim he had attacked her first. According to Alan, what happened next was a blur. He said he wrestled the knife away, shoved her to the floor, and began choking her. By the time he realized what he was doing, Lisa was dead. Sanchiluk set in. Unsure what to do, he buried her body beneath their home and tried to make it appear as though she had simply walked away. After his admission, Alan looked to one of his co-workers for advice. He knew this man had once shared a dark story of his own, how years earlier he had crashed a car while drunk, killing a friend. To avoid responsibility, he had moved his friend's body into the driver's seat. Now, Alan was searching for guidance, hoping someone else's crime could light the way out of his own. Together, they tossed around ideas. Alan considered fleeing or hiring a lawyer immediately to challenge the search warrant. At one point, he even suggested going back to Calgary and setting the house on fire, but quickly corrected himself, admitting flames wouldn't be enough. To truly erase evidence, he said, he'd need to blow the place up. In the end, he concluded that running was the only real option left. His co-workers, shockingly, agreed. Alan began weighing where he might go, but there was one factor he hadn't accounted for. The call he had received wasn't just a routine notification. It was the final move in a year-long undercover police operation designed to box him in. Every word Alan said to his colleagues was part of a trap, and his so-called confession was exactly what detectives had been waiting for. In 2013, the province of Alberta updated its laws on missing persons, granting law enforcement broader authority to dig into investigations. Around that time, Lisa Mitchell's case was reassigned to a new department, and detectives immediately put those powers to work. One of their first steps was to re-examine the mysterious voicemail Lisa had left her mother. Phone records revealed that the call didn't come from Lisa's regular number at all. It had been placed from a cheap prepaid phone that had only been active for about a month after Lisa vanished. In that time, the phone was used just 5 times, once to call Lisa's mother and 4 times to call Alan. Yet Alan had never mentioned those calls to investigators. Even more troubling was the location data. All 5 calls had been placed through a cell tower near Alan and Lisa's home. If Lisa had truly left town, as Alan claimed, how could her phone be pinging from right where she supposedly no longer lived? Detectives pressed further, this time into Alan's financial records. What they found was damning. On the very day Lisa disappeared, Alan made a series of disturbing purchases: a large plastic tub, bleach, rubber gloves, cement, a bucket, wooden boards, and cat litter. The last item was especially suspicious. Alan was severely allergic to cats. He had no reason to buy it. Put together, the items painted a grim picture. Alan had been preparing to dispose of a body. As for the prepaid phone, investigators linked it directly back to him. A receipt from Walmart, paid with Alan's own bank card, showed he had purchased the exact same model of phone used to make those 5 calls. Still, suspicion wasn't enough. Detectives knew they needed one of 2 things to bring Alan down: Lisa's body or his confession. So they launched an elaborate undercover sting, codenamed Operation Aurora. The plan began simply. An undercover female officer staged a minor fender bender with Alan, sparking a casual conversation that turned into a friendship. Soon after, she introduced him to another undercover operative, this one posing as a businessman opening a car dealership. The man offered Alan a job, and quickly the 2 grew close. To maintain the illusion, police went all in. They set up an actual dealership, complete with staff. Several more undercover officers were placed inside, weaving themselves into Alan's daily life. Even the woman who occasionally babysat his children, the girlfriend of his co-worker, was part of the operation. Over months, Alan grew to trust them. When the time was right, detectives staged the final phase, a fake business trip with 2 of the undercover officers. During the trip, the lead detective called Alan, posing as law enforcement, and told him police were about to search his house because they believed Lisa's body was buried there. The strategy worked. Panicked, Alan confided in the 2 men he believed were his closest allies. Both were wired with hidden recorders, and they captured his full confession on tape. Shortly afterward, Alan was arrested and brought back to Calgary. At the same time, investigators executed the search warrant. They had combed the property once before, 2 years earlier, but had found nothing. This time, guided by Alan's purchases and his confession, they looked more closely. In the basement, they noticed something odd: a raised cement platform in the corner. It looked unnatural, and its dimensions matched perfectly the wooden board Alan had purchased years earlier. Officers began dismantling it. Beneath the cement, they uncovered a hidden cavity. Inside was a large plastic tub filled with salt and cat litter, and inside that tub lay the remains of Lisa Mitchell. Although Lisa's body had been hidden beneath Alan's home for 2 years, his attempt to conceal it ended up backfiring. The way he stored the remains, sealed in salt and cat litter, actually slowed decomposition enough for the medical examiner to determine her cause of death. Just as Alan had confessed, Lisa had been strangled. That wasn't the only evidence working against him. On Alan's computer, investigators uncovered a disturbing digital trail. In the days following Lisa's death, he had searched the internet for information on how different materials and conditions affected decomposition. Even more incriminating, the emails supposedly sent by Lisa in the weeks after her disappearance were traced directly back to Alan's device. Detectives also made another chilling discovery. Alan had secretly installed spyware on Lisa's phone. The program allowed him to monitor her calls and record audio. That was how he obtained the clip he later used to fabricate the strange voicemail her mother received in the middle of the night. This revelation suggested that Lisa's murder may have been premeditated, contradicting Alan's claims that it had been a heat-of-the-moment fight. Still, proving deliberate planning beyond all doubt was nearly impossible. Prosecutors eventually agreed to reduce the charge to second-degree murder, which carried a lighter penalty. Following his lawyer's advice, Alan pleaded guilty in exchange for avoiding a first-degree murder trial. Even then, he insisted he had acted in self-defense, portraying himself as a longtime victim of domestic abuse at Lisa's hands. The prosecution countered with a very different picture: a man who carefully planned his partner's murder, executed it, and then spent years covering it up. In the end, the judge found there wasn't enough to convict him of second-degree murder. Alan was instead found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to just 7 years in prison. The decision outraged Lisa's family. Prosecutors immediately appealed, and the court extended Alan's sentence, but only to 10 years. The blow was even harsher when Alan was granted early release after serving just 5. That freedom didn't last. Alan quickly violated his parole and was sent back to prison, where he remained until his official release in 2022. The punishment may have felt shockingly light, but investigators still saw the case as a rare and remarkable victory. For over a year, a team of undercover officers had infiltrated Alan's life, posing as friends and colleagues, building trust, and patiently steering him into a trap. In the end, it worked. Alan confessed in his own words, exposing the dark secret he had carried for years. As for Lisa's children, they were placed in the care of her mother after Alan's arrest. They have lived with her ever since, growing up far from the shadow of the man who took their mother's life. Share your thoughts on this story in the comment section. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.